Okay. And I told him, I said, you can't do that. And he goes, oh, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. I'm like, you got to take something out of there, man. I'm like, I'm begging you, please. Like you're breaking my heart. Like I just can't take it, my God. And so they didn't do it. They didn't change it. Well, all the way through the season. I go back down there. They're not getting any tomatoes, nothing.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like, it's a jungle. And
Yeah.
and not only that, they have a lot of deer that come in their yard, so they put the netting up on the edge. So there was no room for the plants to then kind of sprawl out. So I went through and I got up early one morning and I went out there and I cut every other plant out of there. And I left them though. I just left them. Like I just snipped the bottom of it, right? And they died in place. Well, lo and behold, guess what happened a month later? They started getting tomatoes.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah.
see, you have to give it space. There's no way around it. But when I went down there the first time, the bed looked perfectly planted with 9 plants in it. But I knew
When there were
from
9
experience,
baby plants,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, there's like
So
4
it's
leaves
only
sticking out of the
exception to
ground.
that is if you actually are successful in doing the single stemming approach. That's the only way that design that they had would be successful.
Right.
And, I was looking for something to help with my garden plan for this year, so I was looking back on some old videos, and it was like, "Oh, was that in 2022?" And there's my voice saying, "And this is it has a stake because I plan on single stemming this." And I'm like, "Oh, this wasn't the one I was looking for." And then in 2021's video, it's like, "Well, yeah, and I think this one's turned into double stemming." And it's like, I laughed at myself because I wasn't even conscious of it, I think year to year, that I had flopped at it so poorly, year to
Yeah.
year. And this is all around. I'm searching this out because this is all around how many tomato plants did I put into the cage baby. This is what I'm trying to track down because I haven't grown tomatoes, in earnest in that space in a while. Right. So it's, and I had the moment, and this was post the spacing episode that we recorded, that moment of, again, more doesn't always equal more. Plants into this 7-foot space. But I looked, and one year I had 2 plants. And I know I don't have to go back to look at any other footage. I know those plants were happier.
Right. So on this,
I know it's growth,
it
baby.
is.
It's growth. Hold on, wait. Leonard, what are you
Leonard's
doing over
sleeping.
there? Hold on, wait. Bro.
So I want to say this because you're talking about single stemming. Um, just to make it very clear, if you're growing determinants, do not single stem them because
Mhm.
you will not get a good harvest. So please don't single stem
Good to
determinant
know.
tomatoes. Now, I can tell you why, because I had what's called a semi determinant, which is kind of a tomato where it'll go in between. It could go indeterminate, but it favors more determinate. It's kind of confusing. And I wanted to single stem it. Well, I got like 2 tomatoes. I didn't realize what it was. So after going back and understanding, I don't do that anymore. But yeah, if you're growing determinants, do not single stem them. Um, it's just a recipe. And again, that kind of goes back to know your variety
Yeah.
and know your
Yeah.
techniques, right? So for me and for anybody in the South, you want to grow determinate tomatoes where Batavia and people up north can get away with growing indeterminates and very
Mhm.
well at that. So
Mhm.
it's just a struggle.
Which it seems opposite, and so the Belle currently is a paid actor. I thought you were gonna say something profound. I had the feeling, but
I
I
didn't
was
have the
wrong.
feeling.
Yeah,
So
let's go ahead and move that along. But it seems the opposite for a warm weather crop like tomatoes. It's in the tomato plant, and it'll just keep on growing and producing and growing and producing, right? Whereas calendar when it comes to these warm weather plants compared to young Ben. But the difference is our
right,
summers are much different. Like his summers hit a peak where some of those warm weather crops are miserable to the point of, you don't see them in people's gardens, or if they're not in there, they're not thriving. Where mine is pretty mild, all things considered. So when we have summer, it's going to be the same experience for these tomato plants, generally speaking. And so that determinate variety really has an opportunity to say it's a determined number of tomatoes it's going to produce. You can get in and get out more so. I also
Right.
still grow determinate tomatoes, primarily because I was growing paste tomatoes, but I'm excited about the Ace
Dude, you're
in
gonna
our
like the
seed
Ace
shop.
Bush. Yeah, you're gonna like those.
Yeah, I was looking back, I was, planning out, like, my tomatoes, and this may be the fewest number of tomato plants that I grow
You'll
this
still have
year.
extras.
Yeah, of course I will. But I was like, "Wait a minute, do I have a red slicer?" And I'm like, because in my mind, long and short of it, when I went back, because 'cause I'd already pulled out the tomato seeds for, my plantings, my seed starting, and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, he did grow this, and he did say it was a slicer. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
fine."
Yeah, they were
So
good. They were real good. I was very happy with those tomatoes. Okay, so we also have to factor in our harvest time. And
mhm.
we've got one more after this that's really important. So hang with us. But harvest time is really important too, especially like this time of year when you've got the cool season crops and stuff like that. You really want to make sure that you're getting all of them in and you're getting them in on time so that you can harvest them at peak season. So it's just kind of like with your broccoli. If you wait too long, what you're going to invariably see is you're going to see them start to separate. So what I typically do is if I'm growing them and I'm like, hey, they're not separating, but they're not at size yet, I let them go until I just start to see that separation and then I'll harvest them.
Mhm.
Or if they get to the size that I want before that, then I'll harvest them. But it's the same with cabbages. What else? Rutabagas, because a
Mhm,
rutabaga or a
mhm.
turnip you can harvest at any size.
Yeah,
So
carrots,
yeah, but
Mhm,
don't sleep on it. Like
mhm.
pay attention, and if it's too small but the weather is looking good, leave it. You know what I mean? Leave it and see what you can get.
Well, let me jump in there. The weather is optimal versus looking good, right? Like, I'm gonna say both. The weather is optimal. If you look at something like beets or carrots or, turnips, something that prefers to grow in the cooler weather, if it's continuing to grow and it's not the size that you believe is the optimal weather,
Yeah,
that thing ain't getting bigger. Like, that's not what you're gonna do because it's stale, but heading to the warmer part of the growing season. So, know that to be the truth there.
yeah. So that's a real basic one, but just understand that like as time goes, they'll grow, but you want to catch them at peak. And the only way to really figure that out is to pay attention and just watch it. And then the next one, what I told you we're going to go through that one quick. The next one is important, and that's fertilization. So I'm getting to the point where I hate talking about fertilizing because it gets so much flack. But then again, I'm like, I don't really care. But fertilization is really important. And when I say fertilization, what I'm referring to is something outside of compost. Okay. It's a very unpopular thought process that I have, but I view compost as an amendment, not a fertilizer. I want to be very clear about that. Fertilizer straight up comes from a bag or a bottle. But when you start adding those extra nutrients in and also doing the composting, or adding compost, whatever, that's when I started to see bigger and better crops. Where last year I was getting 100% broccoli harvest,
Mhm.
and I also got nice size heads off of them, and it was solely because of the fertilization. We fertilize often and heavy for this, but they're also heavy feeders, so that was part of
Yeah.
it.
I'd almost say, without looking up the official definition of amendments, I'd consider, compost and fertilizer an amendment, but I don't consider compost a fertilizer, right? Do I really got a tray for a lot of years? And it's not that I was at the garden. I didn't look at it to say like fertilizer is bad. It was the lazy gardener in me not wanting things were growing in my garden. But this is what this episode is about: the components that take you from growing something to
Right.
growing the best of something. And what a lot going to be fertilizer schedule or the act of fertilizing. Let's just start there.
Well, so compost, what compost really does is it keeps your soil healthy. And so it's a extremely slow release, right? So it's kind
Hmm.
of like, like I put those alfalfa pellets in my garden. Have you seen that? And I call it my insurance policy. It breaks down, it'll add to, well,
Yeah.
compost is basically the same thing. It's like your insurance policy. And we want to keep our soil healthy. Like that's the goal of all of this, is to not ruin your soil, where to the tune of like you have to let it rest for a year. How bad would that suck if you're just like, "Yep, I'm not gardening this year. We'll just go without."
Yeah.
So you want to kind of keep it going, keep it active. And so compost has to break down
Hmm.
in order to feed. Now, I know what you're probably thinking if you're a longtime listener is so does organic fertilizer, but it breaks down faster because it's much smaller and it's designed to do that. So just think about,
Organic fertilizer breaks down faster, is what you're saying,
it breaks down
than
faster than
compost.
compost. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Compost
so
is more of like for the long game,
yeah, it's the long
right?
game, and you should, in gardening, you absolutely need to run the long game. I mean,
Hmm.
100%, you need to be adding compost, but you also need to be adding topsoil. Just remember that. But it makes a big difference. And fertilizer is, it's fed, generally speaking. You put down an organic fertilizer, it feeds within 2 weeks when it's warm. If you put down a synthetic fertilizer, it feeds immediately. That's the point. Because if you're putting compost in, let's say you plant your garden and you put your lettuce in. You put your lettuce in right now. Well, your lettuce is going to be done in like a month ish, right? Well, how much of that compost is actually going to break down within that month to feed that lettuce? It's not going to be much. So that's where you're going to use your fertilizers in conjunction. And I think we were talking about farms a lot lately, but the big farms and stuff, I think, have really given fertilizer a bad name
Mm-hmm.
and pest control. And it's a damn shame because it's part of it. It's part of the system, and it's not bad if you do it responsibly, right?
Yeah. And just a note, fertilizer doesn't have to come in a bag. There are tons of people that make their own
Yeah.
fertilizer. Now, the potency of what you're making, you know, maybe there's a question mark around it, right? So just keep that in mind. Just because you've soaked some banana peels in something, in some water, and you have a science experiment in your kitchen, doesn't mean that you're feeding the
Yeah.
plants that you're watering with to the same strength as insert the next option for fertilizer.
Yeah. And I mean, like fish fertilizer, for instance, it's very light. It's hard to burn your plants with fish fertilizer,
Mhm.
and it works amazing. But and Batavia laughs and I smirk when she mentioned soaking banana peels, but you're exactly right. Like you take 3 banana peels and soak it in water. Like, what are you gaining out of that? Well, first of all,
Mhm.
what nutrient are you getting out of that? And what's your purpose for it? You know what I mean? Like you start to
Mhm.
get so specialized with it, and we don't know the strength of it.